The day has done all it needs to do. Now only stillness remains. Let your thoughts loosen, like threads unraveling in the dark. What comes next is not to solve or to chase, just a quiet story drifting close. Perhaps it's a voice that remembers you, or a silence that has waited patiently. Let it meet you where you are, and let it lead you gently into rest. There used to be a post office at the edge of Whitney Hollow, a single-room shack with a slanted roof, and dust that never seemed to settle. No one delivered mail there anymore, and the nearest town had grown up far enough away to forget it even existed. But it stood tired but intact, like a sentence that never found its period. When Tessa moved back into her grandmother's old house, she found the mailbox still fixed to the fence. It was rusted, crooked, and slightly ajar, as though it had exhaled and never inhaled again. She ran her fingers over the peeling paint and smiled. That mailbox had once held love letters, birthday cards, even one mysterious postcard from Paris with no return address. It had also, for as long as she could remember, held a strange superstition. Her grandmother used to say, "Never leave a ring in a mailbox. It's like asking the past to return." Tessa had laughed at that back when she was 17 and bold, enough to kiss boys behind the tool shed and steal whiskey from the pantry. But she wasn't 17 anymore. Now she was 33, recently divorced, with a car full of boxes and a heart that still hadn't decided what shape to take. As she unloaded the car, she paused to look toward the mailbox again. It felt like it was watching her, not in a menacing way, just aware. She shook off the thought and carried the last of her things inside. The house smelled the same, lavender and thyme. Her grandmother had passed away 5 years ago, but her presence still hummed in the walls, in the creaky stair, in the wallpaper that refused to peel. That night, Tessa couldn't sleep. The wind ticked against the window like soft fingernails, and the old house moaned gently with age. She wasn't afraid, just unsettled. At midnight, she made tea, wandered through the kitchen, and found herself standing at the front door again. She opened it without really deciding to, and there it was, the mailbox, faintly silver in the moonlight. She remembered the ring. It wasn't anything expensive, just a small silver band she'd worn all through high school. It had turned her finger green once, and she'd loved it all the more for it. It had been in a drawer in her jewelry box, tangled up in old friendship bracelets and single earrings. Something nudged her gently from inside. Not a voice, not quite. She stepped outside barefoot, the porch cool under her feet. She carried the ring in her palm. Without thinking, she opened the mailbox and placed the ring inside, then closed the lid. The air seemed to still. No wind, no ticking branches, just a kind of pause. She didn't dream that night, just floated. The next morning, she nearly forgot about the ring, until she went to check the mailbox, curious. She opened it slowly. It was empty. Her stomach fluttered. Maybe it had slipped through a crack. Maybe a raccoon with an eye for jewelry. Maybe, but then she saw it. A folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. Not hers. She picked it up and opened it. One sentence. In faded ink, "You came back." Tessa stared at it. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and something older. It wasn't her grandmother's handwriting, and it certainly wasn't hers. She folded the note again, carefully and pressed it to her chest. The wind returned. The house creaked. Life stirred. And Tessa smiled. Tessa spent the morning in a kind of quiet drift, half believing the note had been a dream. But the folded paper still sat on her knitstand, heavy with something unspoken. She tried to shake off the feeling, telling herself it must have been some prank, maybe a neighbor, though the nearest one lived miles down the dirt road and had 2 bad knees. She made toast, skipped butter, and sat by the window. The mailbox was still there, just as rusty and tilted as always. Yet it felt different now, like something had been invited. By noon she gave in to her curiosity and walked back out to the fence. No ring, no second note. She hesitated, then placed a small daisy inside, just to see. Closed the lid. That afternoon, while unpacking boxes of old books, she found an envelope. It was tucked inside a volume of Wuthering Heights, sealed and addressed to her grandmother in looping cursive. No stamp, no return address, just the words, "For you on the day you forget." She opened it slowly, her breath catching. Inside was a photograph. Tessa squinted. The image showed the old post office, but newer. White paint still fresh, a neat sign reading Whitney Hollow Postal Branch. And on the steps, a young man and woman. The woman wore a plaid dress and a ribbon in her hair. The man had his arm around her, and something about the tilt of his head, the way he looked at the woman, made Tessa's stomach flip. Because the woman was her grandmother. Younger, of course, but unmistakable. That same smile, tilted slightly to the left. That same gentleness in the eyes. Tessa turned the photo over. July 5th, 1952, last time she said yes. What did that even mean? She set the photo beside the note from the mailbox and stared at both for a long time. Her grandmother had never mentioned a man before her grandfather. In fact, she rarely spoke of her own youth at all, except in fragments: a barn dance, a torn hem, a red bicycle. Tessa's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. A car was approaching. She hadn't expected anyone. Dust kicked up behind an old blue truck as it slowed to a stop in front of the house. Out stepped a man in his late 50s, tall, lean, with silver hair tucked beneath a faded hat. He tipped it politely. "Didn't mean to startle you. Name's Elias. I used to check on the place after your grand passed. Make sure no pipes froze, that sort of thing." Tessa blinked. "You knew her?" "Everybody knew Mabel," he said, smiling softly. "She used to run the post office with my uncle back when this town had more people than ghosts." Tessa gestured him toward the porch. "You want some iced tea?" They sat with their glasses sweating between them. She asked about the photo. He took one look and nodded, almost sadly. "That's Jonah," he said, tapping the man's face. "Mabel's first love." "First?" she asked. Elias nodded. They were planning to marry. But Jonah disappeared just after the 4th of July. Went out to deliver a telegram. Never came back. Tessa's mouth went dry. What happened? No one really knows. Car was found by the river. Empty. Town folks thought he ran off, but Mabel, she never believed that. Said he made a promise he wouldn't break. She glanced toward the mailbox. A shiver passed through her. That mailbox, Elias continued, was his idea. said he wanted her to always have something waiting, even if it was just air and hope. After Elias left, Tessa sat on the porch alone. The sun began to slide behind the hills, and the wind picked up again, gentle, like breath on the back of her neck. That night she left a second note in the mailbox. "Who are you?" No ring, no gift, just that. She checked before bed. Still there. But in the morning, the note was gone, and in its place a pressed flower, one she hadn't seen in years, a white violet. The white violet rested on her palm like something from another time, delicate, untouched, with no trace of decay. Tessa had only ever seen them once before, in her grandmother's old pressed flower album. They were rare here, especially in June. The mountains grew them, not Whitney Hollow. She placed the bloom between 2 pages of her journal and smoothed it gently, heart thudding without rhythm. Then she picked up the pen. "Why are you reaching out?" She wrote on a fresh scrap of paper. She folded it, walked barefoot to the mailbox, and left it inside without hesitation. By now it felt like something between a conversation and a ritual. She didn't expect an answer right away, so she spent the morning unpacking kitchen utensils and uncovering oddities. Her grandmother's cast iron pan, still seasoned and heavy as memory, a stack of recipe cards in Mabel's perfect script, and a little tin box she didn't remember ever seeing before. It was tucked behind a shelf, sealed with a ribbon. Inside were dozens of tiny envelopes, each one marked with a date and a single name, Jonah. Tessa sat down, the box trembling slightly in her hands. She opened the one on top. July 5th, 1962. Jonah. 10 years now. I swept the porch and found your shoelace again. The one you used to tie like a looped bow, not a knot. I left it where it was. The letter wasn't long, but it was tender, raw in the kind of way people write when they're not expecting an answer. There were letters for every July 5th after that, sometimes just a line or two. Some written in joy, your rosebush bloomed again. Some in sorrow, I'm tired, Jonah. The nights are too quiet. Some were just blank pages, folded in silence. She hadn't written to him every day, only once a year. On the day he vanished, Tessa leaned back in her chair and let her eyes close. When she opened them again, it was nearly evening. She ran to the mailbox. The note she left was gone. In its place was a card, one of those old telegram-style postcards, thick and yellowed, the kind the post office used in the 50s, typed in all caps, to the girl who left the ring. Sometimes love gets lost on the road. I never meant to disappear, but the letters kept me here. No name, no signature, but something in her chest bloomed and ached at once. She stared down the long, empty road. The fence, the weeds, the gentle hush that came just before nightfall. Then the wind shifted. A light rustle paper, maybe? She turned toward the mailbox again and opened it one more time. Nothing. But when she stepped back inside, she noticed the photograph had changed. The one of Jonah and Mabel. It was subtle, barely there, but Jonah's hand, it was no longer on Mabel's shoulder. It rested over her heart. Tessa stared for a long time. She didn't feel fear. She felt seen. That night, she lit a candle for no reason at all. Let it burn in the kitchen window. Let the flame flicker as if something or someone might still be looking for a way home. Before bed, she took out her journal and wrote only one line. "I believe you." Then she placed it in the mailbox and whispered good night. The morning arrived slow and gray. A hush spread across the fields like a wool blanket. The candle in the window had gone out some time in the night, though she could still smell a faint trace of wax and wick lingering in the air like breath that had barely left. Tessa waited until the sun cleared the low ridge before stepping outside. The mailbox felt cooler than usual, as though it had drawn in the night and hadn't let go. She opened the lid with steady hands, unsure what to expect this time. Inside was an envelope, not folded but sealed. Her name was written on the front. Only her first name, Tessa, but in handwriting that looked like her own, only gentler. As if someone had written it slowly, with care, like tracing a memory. She took it inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened it. The letter read, "I remember the sound of gravel under tires, the knock I never made, the words I held in my throat too long. It wasn't fear that kept me away. It was something older, a turning, a night where the road split and I followed silence instead of home. But I never stopped listening, not once. There was no signature, but she felt him, Jonah, or whatever part of him had left the road and stayed behind." She held the paper against her cheek. It was warm, though her kitchen was not. The phone rang, startling her. It was Mary Hart from town. Tessa had known her vaguely as a child. She ran the bakery, sang in the church choir, always had a ribbon in her hair, no matter the weather. "Sweetheart," Mary said without greeting, "I heard you were back." "Just settling in," Tessa said, her voice a little hoarse. "Thought I'd bring you a pie. And maybe something else." There was a pause. "You ever hear of the Dust Book?" Tessa frowned. "No. It was something folks used to whisper about," Mary said. "Back when the Hollow had more stories than streetlights. They said sometimes when someone's spirit lingers too long, their words don't die, they just get dusty, covered up, forgotten. But if someone stirs them up, they might find their way out again, like a haunting?" Tessa asked, careful. Mary laughed. "Oh no, dear. Not haunting. Just remembering. Old words can be patient." Tessa thanked her and hung up. She stared at the letter again. Old words. Maybe the ring had stirred something. Maybe it was never about summoning. Maybe it was about allowing. The rest of the day passed quietly. Tessa swept the porch, brewed tea, and finally dared to open more of the tin box. She found one letter dated 1971, written on the back of a newspaper clipping. The clipping reported on an unsolved disappearance. Jonah Callahan, age 27, last seen July 5th, 19. The article had a photo. Same man from the picture with Mabel. Same eyes. But what startled her wasn't the image. It was the address listed in the article. It was her address. The house she lived in now. The one he never returned to. She sat very still. Outside, the mailbox creaked open on its own. She didn't run. She just breathed. And when the wind carried a soft, scraping sound like footsteps on gravel, she whispered, without fear, "I hear you." That night, Tessa dreamed of fog. Not frightening, not cold, just dense and quiet. She saw a figure walking just ahead of her. He never turned. but he left footprints that glowed for a moment in the mist. And in the dream she followed, not to chase, but simply to walk with him. The next morning, Tessa awoke before dawn. A thin, silver light crept through the curtains, and for a moment, she couldn't remember if she'd truly dreamed or simply remembered something that had never happened. She rose and walked to the mailbox, the grass still damp with dew, cool against her feet. The mailbox was closed, silent. She hesitated, touched the handle, and opened it gently. Inside was a photograph. This time it was not an old picture, not faded with time or curled at the edges. It was new. She knew it was new because the porch was exactly as it looked now, peeling paint, her tea mug left on the railing, and the lavender bush she'd trimmed just 2 days ago. The photograph was taken from a distance, from the angle of the road, as if someone had passed by and paused just long enough to see her. And there she was, Tessa standing on the porch, her head tilted in thought, eyes not looking at the camera but slightly above, as if watching a bird or waiting for a sound. She had no memory of standing like that. No one had been by with a camera. She was sure of it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the photo over. No date, no writing, just a faint fingerprint pressed in the corner, smudged with dust. She brought the photo inside and placed it face down on the kitchen table. The kettle whistled. She hadn't turned it on. Still she poured water, made tea, and sat in silence, the cup warming her palms. She thought of Elias. He hadn't been by since that first day, but maybe he knew more. She drove to town. The streets of Whitney Hollow were quiet, as always. The gas station had one pump. The diner served only breakfast, and Elias's truck sat outside the hardware store, looking exactly like it had for 20 years. He greeted her with a slow nod, as if he'd been expecting her. "I have a question," she said, skipping any pretense of small talk. "I figured you might." She showed him the photograph. He looked at it long and hard, then let out a breath through his nose. "You look like her, you know, my grandmother?" He nodded. She used to get pictures like this, unmarked. Never saw who left them. Just found them in the mailbox or slid under the door. Did she ever find out who sent them? Elias scratched his chin. She always said it wasn't about who sent them. It was about who didn't forget. Tessa swallowed. Did she ever talk about what really happened to Jonah? Elias turned and walked to the back of the store. He returned with a small box wrapped in twine. "She left this with me. Told me to give it to you if you ever came home and started asking questions." Tessa untied the twine slowly. Inside was a journal. Her grandmother's. The first page was dated July 6th, 1952, the day after Jonah vanished. "I dreamed last night that the road opened up and swallowed him. Not in anger, not in hunger. Just to keep him safe from something we didn't understand yet." The entries were sporadic, some years with nothing, others full of longing and sharp, aching hope. One line stayed with her. "There are things love can't carry, but memory can. Maybe that's enough." She thanked Elias and drove home, the journal seat belted beside her, like a passenger. When she pulled into the driveway, the wind picked up again, just for a moment. The porch swing moved, though she hadn't seen it do so in days. Inside the mailbox, she found nothing. And yet something had changed. The air in the house was softer, warmer, as if the silence had been smoothed over by invisible hands. That night, she didn't leave a note. She simply sat on the porch, the journal in her lap, the photo tucked into its pages. And when the moon rose high, silvering the trees, she whispered not to the wind, but to the waiting stillness. "Tell me what you remember." The reply came not in the mailbox the next morning, but on the window pane. It was early, the world still clinging to sleep, when Tessa noticed the faint outline of something drawn in the condensation on her kitchen window. She leaned in close, breath shallow, heart alert. A ring, just the shape of it simple, round, with a small stone sketched in the fog. It could have been the work of a fingertip, or maybe just a trick of breath and moisture. But somehow she knew better. She pressed her hand to the glass. It felt cold, but not unfriendly. The symbol faded slowly in the rising light. She sat for hours at the table, reading her grandmother's journal, one page at a time. There were pieces of a life she never knew, afternoons spent writing letters that would never be mailed, candlelit talks with a man who was no longer there, and the quiet, steadfast conviction that something sacred had not ended, just moved somewhere she couldn't follow. Tessa came to one entry that pulled her breath short. "I saw him in the reflection today, just for a blink, standing behind me like he'd never left. He wasn't young anymore, and neither was I, but he smiled like it still mattered." It was dated 1983. 31 years after Jonah vanished. She wondered, suddenly, how a person could carry love for that long with nowhere to place it, but in letters and fog and candle flames. By mid-afternoon, a knock came at the door. Mary Hart stood there, holding a small pie and something bundled in cloth. "Hope you like blueberry," she said. "Your grandmother always did." Tessa took the pie with a grateful smile. "You didn't have to." "I did," Mary interrupted gently. "You've stirred something up, child. It's not just about your grandma. This town remembers things, but sometimes it takes someone new, someone still listening, to bring it to the surface." She handed over the cloth bundle. Inside was a brooch. Tarnished silver shaped like a tiny bird in flight. "She wore this the day Jonah disappeared," Mary said. "She told me once it was a promise, that he gave it to her when they were just 16 and made her swear she'd wait for a sign if anything ever happened." "A sign?" Mary nodded. "Something small, something winged. Something only the heart would recognize." Tessa stared at the bird in her hand. It was heavier than it looked. That evening she stood in the yard, the brooch pinned to her sweater, the journal in her other hand. The wind had quieted. The trees were still, and the air shimmered. Not visibly, not exactly, but it was there in the feeling that she wasn't quite alone. The porch swing creaked once, then again, as if someone invisible had taken a seat beside her. She opened the journal to a blank page and began to write, not as Mabel, as herself. "You've waited long. I don't know why, but I'm here now, and I'm listening. If there's more, I'll carry it. If there's peace, I'll welcome it. If there's something left, I'll see it through." She didn't place the page in the mailbox this time. She left it on the porch swing, held down by a stone from the garden. The stars came early that night, twinkling before the last blush of dusk had faded. Somewhere in the trees an owl called. Somewhere in the sky, clouds shifted and then parted, like a curtain being gently drawn back. Tessa stayed outside until the moon was high. When she returned to the porch, the note was gone. The stone still sat there, but beside it was the ring. Not in the mailbox this time, right on the swing, waiting. She didn't touch the ring at first. It rested on the porch swing like something sacred or dangerous. The moonlight gave it a dull gleam, not the polished shimmer she remembered from the first night. It looked older now, worn down by decades of waiting. But unmistakably, it was the same ring. Her grandmother's, Jonah's, hers now. Tessa sat beside it, careful not to disturb its place. It felt like sitting next to someone you didn't want to wake. For a long while, she just breathed. The silence was complete, not hollow, but full, like it was holding its breath with her. She finally picked up the ring. It was warm. She held it between her fingers, examining the small, oval stone. There was a scratch now, running diagonally across the surface. Had it always been there? Or had time marked it too? She slipped it onto her finger. It didn't resist. A perfect fit. The moment it settled on her hand, a sound broke the stillness. A single, sharp tap on the kitchen window behind her. She turned, startled, but nothing moved. Only her reflection. But not just hers. For a breath, a shadow stood behind her reflection. A figure, tall, slightly hunched, like he carried something heavy. Then it faded, too quickly to be real, but too precisely to be imagined. She didn't move. "Jonah?" She whispered. No answer, but something in the air shifted, as though the house itself had exhaled. Inside, she found the photograph, again, the one of her standing on the porch. She hadn't looked at it since the day she found it. This time she noticed something different. Behind her in the image, far in the distance, was a figure on the road. Blurred. Just the barest outline of a man. It hadn't been there before. She was sure of it. She flipped the photo over again. Still blank. She placed it beside the journal and sat down at the table. Her thoughts drifted to the dust book Mary had mentioned. She imagined it now, not a literal book, but a place in the world where old stories gathered, settling like ash until someone disturbed them. The past didn't vanish, it just waited. And maybe, when someone returned, someone who remembered, who asked, who stayed, it stirred again, not out of vengeance, but recognition. That night, she lit 3 candles, one on the porch, one in the kitchen window, and one by the tin box of letters. Then she wrote a new note. "If there's more I need to know, I'm ready. If there's something you left unfinished, show me where to look. I won't run." She placed a note back in the mailbox, heart calm, hands steady. She no longer felt like a visitor here. Not entirely. The wind picked up around midnight. Not howling, not cold. Just movement. A presence. She stood in the doorway, ring on her hand, candlelight flickering behind her. And then, out of nowhere, the bell above the front door chimed. She hadn't heard it since arriving. She stepped back inside. On the floor beneath the bell was a scrap of paper, torn at the edges, yellowed like it had been lost for years. It read, "Start with the place we last stood still." She didn't need to ask what it meant. She knew, without knowing how, where that was. The grove behind the house. The one no longer marked on any map. The one her grandmother always told her not to wander into at dusk. She had always thought it was just a story. But now, dusk was exactly when she'd go. The grove waited, just beyond the fence where the fields ended and the trees began. It wasn't large, maybe a dozen old cottonwoods circling a patch of earth that always seemed slightly too quiet. As a child, Tessa had never dared step inside it. Her grandmother's warnings weren't harsh, just firm. Not after dusk, love. The trees remember things best at night. Now she understood. Ring on her finger, flashlight in her pocket, she walked toward the grove as the sky dimmed to a soft violet. The crickets had quieted. The wind moved differently here, like it bent around something unseen. She paused at the edge. The ground inside looked undisturbed. No path, no markers. And yet she felt drawn to a spot near the center, where the trees leaned inward, almost like they were bowing. She stepped in. The air changed. Not colder, denser, like it was watching her. She found herself standing before a wide, flat stone she didn't remember from her childhood. Moss-covered, half-buried. When she knelt to brush it off, the ring on her hand brushed the stone. It hummed. Not audibly, not quite, but she felt it like a vibration deep in her chest. A gentle, wordless yes. She ran her fingers along the stone's edge, searching for something. Anything. Her fingers found a small notch, almost like a hinge. She pressed it. The stone gave way just slightly enough to reveal a hollow beneath. Inside was a tin, older than the one in the house, rusted shut. She took it gently, carried it back to the porch, and pried it open with the edge of a key. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, was a photograph, a key, and a note, all carefully preserved. The photograph showed her grandmother and Jonah, but not as young lovers. Older, maybe late 30s, early 40s. They were standing right in front of the grove, arms around each other, as if the moment had been secret but sacred. So he had come back, at least once. Or perhaps he never truly left. The note was written in a rougher hand, not like the elegant script from the mailbox letters. We met again, just once. I couldn't stay. She understood. The grove kept our promise. This key is for the room she locked, not to hide, but to hold what mattered. If you found this, then you carry both of us. That's enough. Tessa picked up the key. It was brass, small, etched with the number 3. She knew the house had 2 upstairs rooms, both open, but the attic had always been locked. She had never asked why. With the key in hand, she climbed the stairs slowly. At the end of the narrow hall was a wooden door, paint flaking, a single rusted keyhole below the handle. She turned the key. It clicked, smooth and certain. The door creaked open. Inside was dust and light. The small attic window let in the last of the sunset, casting golden rays across an old trunk, a rocking chair, and shelves lined with letters. Hundreds of them, all sealed. A soft breeze stirred one of them loose. It fluttered to the floor at her feet. She picked it up. Her name. Not Mabel. Not Grandma. Tessa. The envelope was unsealed. She opened it. You were always going to be the one to finish this. You see, love is a kind of echo. If spoken clearly once, it can ring through lifetimes. You heard it. You followed it. So I can rest now, and she can too. Tessa sat in the rocking chair, letter in hand, key still warm in her palm. The sunset faded. The attic darkened. But her heart lightened. The story was still unfolding. But now, she wasn't just reading it. She was living it. The attic became her sanctuary. Each day after, Tessa would climb the creaky stairs with a cup of tea and settle into the old rocking chair. The letters spread around her like a quiet, paper-thin choir. She didn't open them all at once. She couldn't. They felt like candle flames, too many at once, and the glow would overwhelm her. She started with the ones addressed to my love. Those, she guessed, were from her grandmother to Jonah. They were never dated. Each one was written as if it lived outside time. I saw the sky bend today, not from weather, from memory. I think it remembered you. There are mornings I wake before the sun and still reach across the bed. I don't mind the emptiness anymore. It reminds me you were once there. Some letters were longer, filled with details of town gossip, garden harvests, the ache of hips that had grown tired with age. Others were only a few lines. There's a moth in the kitchen that flutters every night when I light a candle. I think it might be you, or maybe just something that knows how I miss you. Tessa read each one aloud. She didn't know why. It just felt right. The attic responded in small ways, a sigh in the floorboards, a breeze through the window when no window was open, a sense of stillness so complete it bordered on reverent. One afternoon she found a bundle of letters tied with twine, labeled only, not sent. She hesitated before untying the knot. These were different. The handwriting wasn't her grandmother's. It was Jonah's, shaky, uneven in places, perhaps written over time when he was somewhere else, somewhere he couldn't come back from or wasn't allowed to. Mabel, I tried. God knows I tried. But some places, once you go, they don't let you leave with both feet. I see you sometimes, in reflections, in smoke, in the space between rain and thunder. You're always facing away, like you know I'm there but won't turn. I understand. This is the last one I'll write. Not because I'm done loving you, but because I want you to live. You already waited longer than anyone should. Tessa folded that last one slowly and placed it on her lap. A sadness bloomed in her chest, not the kind that sinks you, but the kind that deepens your breath, that teaches you to sit with what has no fix. She noticed something tucked in the bottom of the trunk, a cloth pouch brittle with age. Inside was a pocket watch. It no longer ticked. The face was cracked, the time frozen at 7:13. She turned it over, engraved in looping script. Wherever you are, I am on my way. The words sent a ripple through her, not of fear, of longing. That night she wore the ring and held the watch as she stood on the porch. The air had grown warm, almost too still, like something waited just beyond reach. She lit one of her grandmother's old candles and whispered to the dark, I'm listening. The flame flickered, stretched, then bent sideways. Not from wind, from something else. And the bell above the front door chimed once clear, bright, and lonely. The story wasn't done, but it had begun to circle in on itself, like a thread coming home to its spool. The next morning the town felt different. Nothing outward had changed. The same rusted trucks rumbled down Main Street. The same shop windows blinked open at 9. And the same silver-haired men occupied their favorite bench by the diner, trading half-true stories. But Tessa sensed something underneath all of it. Like the town had exhaled. Like the silence that had filled the cracks of the place had shifted its weight. She walked to Mary Hart's store just after breakfast. The bell above the door jingled twice. Mary looked up from behind the counter. "You've seen the attic." It wasn't a question. Tessa nodded. "And the grove. And the letters. And the watch." Mary's gaze softened. "You've done more than most. But the story hasn't settled yet, has it?" Tessa shook her head. "Not yet." Mary reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small wooden box. She opened it slowly, revealing a bundle of photographs, old receipts, scraps of paper with names scrawled in pencil. "This is what the town forgot or tried to. Jonah left something behind when he vanished. People assumed it was guilt or fear, but I think now it was a door, one he didn't know how to close." Tessa sifted through the contents until her fingers paused on a postcard, edges frayed, ink fading. It showed a chapel, one she didn't recognize. On the back, written in faint cursive, "Third pew, second stone." No name, no date. "Do you know where this is?" Tessa asked. Mary nodded. "Edge of town. Old Mission Chapel. It's not used anymore, not since the fire." "There was a fire?" Mary gave a half-smile. "Not the burning kind. It was more of a forgetting. People stopped going. The doors stayed locked. But I think someone, maybe your grandmother, kept the key." Tessa stood. "Then I should go." Mary didn't try to stop her. "There's a bell in that chapel. If you find what you're meant to, ring it once."